Thanks, Steve. All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta's 50-year, 50-story story hour featuring the women of the Vichy Eight. My name is Jennifer Wesson. I'm the Executive Director of the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta, and on behalf of the Board of Directors and the Committee 50, we welcome you to our third story hour. We're excited to welcome the women of the 1967 Vichy Eight, the first American women's crew to compete in an international event, hailing from Boathouse Row's Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, the oldest competitive rowing club in the country. Our goal in this initiative began with the thought of sharing and passing down stories and connecting friends old and new, but it's growing just into so much more, and we are thrilled to see the outpouring of emotion and laughter and community as we work through these stories. If you haven't read the Vichy story that we posted, please do so afterwards, and check out all of our legendary stories that we're posting on a weekly basis on our website. So wow, we have about 130 participants registered for this evening. So I'm going to give it just a few housekeeping items to help with the sound and the flow of the evening. I've muted everyone to eliminate any background noise, but you have the ability to unmute at any time. But just please be reminded that any black background noise will prevent others from being able to hear the speaker, especially if you have a phone and a computer on. Make sure you turn one of the sounds off so we don't hear an echo as well when you're speaking, okay? If you'd like, be sure to put your screen on gallery view. That's, if you're only seeing me right now, really big, too close up, you're in speaker view. So you can scroll to the upper right-hand part of your screen and you can see the options, switch to gallery view, and then you'll be able to see 49 people at a time, and then you can arrow over to maybe 2 or 3 more screens so you can see everybody here this evening. I encourage you to keep your chat room visible off to the side. There's a bottom bar. If you're not too familiar with Zoom, you'll see a chat room. Just click on that and you'll see a little box appear on your right-hand side of your screen. You can type in that chat room to add comments to the stories as speakers are sharing. And then from time to time, I'll be displaying some pictures, which will take over your screen. Don't do anything. Once the pictures are removed, your screen will return to exactly the way it was, okay? And lastly, I just want everyone to be aware that I am recording this session, so it is available to those that were not able to join us tonight, and to have you know, a record of these incredible and very personal stories. So just quick notes about our format. After a very short overview, I'm going to turn it over to our co-facilitators tonight, Dottie Brown and Carol Bauer. The women of the Vichy Eight will each share for a few minutes, and then we're going to open it up to the whole group to ask questions, comment, or add stories. You're encouraged throughout the evening to add stories in the chat room, but if you want to share afterwards when we open it up, I encourage you to use the raise your hand button or type in the chat, and then that way one of the facilitators or myself can call on you and we can keep from folks talking over one another. That would be awesome. All that being said, we have kept this in this kind of format, a Zoom format, because we feel it's really important to see one another. When you move to other platforms, you can only see the panelists, and you know, part of what's making this special is that we get to see the reactions and the laughters and the smiles of the whole group. And the Vichy Eight is not only sharing with us, but we are sharing with them, you know, recognition of and appreciation for their resilience in moving women's competition forward. So just a little background on the genesis of these story hours. As part of the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta's 50th anniversary, we wanted to highlight 50 legendary competitors, crews, teams, coaches, influencers that had really catapulted the regatta into a fall classic over the last 50 years. And we put together a committee who I'll introduce in just a moment, to brainstorm how to do this. We knew the list could never be exhaustive, and we wanted it to be representative of a wide breadth of competition and the culture of the Head of the Schuylkill Regatta. We wanted to be an opportunity to hear the stories of the legends that have made the Schuylkill River and Boathouse Row so important to the greater rowing community and special in our hearts. And we also wanted to celebrate the people of our sport and the community by passing down their stories through generations, bridging the past and the present, and thereby bringing about change for the future of our sport. So we published the first story during Head of the Schuylkill Virtual Week in October, and we'll publish new stories weekly, continuing throughout the year until our 2021 regatta. Let me introduce the Committee 50, and I'll let you find their faces because they're here tonight. Alan Robinson, Jim Dietz, Ellen Carver, Pete Simone, Christopher Blackwall, Rick Stellick, and Dottie Brown. And this committee is more than I could ever have imagined. They are brilliant and engaging and thoughtful and community-minded, kind and funny, and above all, they are storytellers. So we would meet each Friday morning and with the agenda of producing these stories, and we would laugh, and one story would segue into another, and it was therapeutic, and it was kind of exactly what this initiative was meant to do. So when the HOSR committed to doing evening programming in October, it was natural to include a story hour with this group leading it. And you can go back and watch all the recordings on our HOSR YouTube page. But we received such great feedback that it led us to agree that we would hold these story hours, if not monthly, every other month or so, with guests of honor and themes that are important or timely to our community. And so the 1967 Vichy Eight changed the course of course for women in rowing. And just a few short years later, some of them would go on to compete in the very first Head of the Schuylkill Regatta. There was only a handful of women in that regatta, and now women account for more than half of all the competitors. This is a story about taking risks, a story of inclusion, and a story of resilience. And we are thrilled that you are here with us tonight to celebrate these women and the power of storytelling and the effects that those stories have on who we become. So without further hesitation, let me introduce our co-host for the evening. Dottie Brown spent her career at the Philadelphia Inquirer. She's the author of Boathouse Row, Waves of Change in the Birthplace of American Rowing, and a member of Vesper Boat Club. Carol Bauer won a gold medal at the 1984 Olympics as part of the Women's Eight, and she is head rowing coach at Bryn Mawr College and a member of the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club. Again, thank you for being here, and Dottie, I am turning it over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I had thought I would start with a little background on the history of women's rowing, which I'm guessing many of you know, so I will try and be fairly brief, but I want to give a little context to what the Vichy Eight women will be talking about tonight. As Jen said, they were the first American women to compete internationally, which happened at the European Championships in Vichy, France back in 1967. So even though rowing was an original sport of the modern day Olympics starting in 1896, women basically did not participate in what was always called a manly sport. It was seen as far too demanding for the Victorian women's supposedly frail body. Wellesley College, where I went, did have rowing starting in the 1880s, but it was seen as a way to develop grace and rhythm. The women rowed to poetry and music and didn't race another crew until the 1960s. 4 women in San Diego started a women's rowing club called ZLAC in 1882, but they rowed heavy rowing boats and were not interested in competing. Here in Philadelphia in 1938, a group of secretaries and clerks banded together to start the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, the first competitive women's rowing club in the United States. One of its founders, Ernestine Bayer, whose daughter will be speaking with us tonight, Ernie. She was with the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club and was one of the founders. Despite their determination to compete, PGRC had no one to row against but each other. At regattas here on the Schuylkill, the men would invite them to do exhibition rows to entertain the crowds. In the early 1960s, a member of PGRC, Joanne Iverson, decided she wanted to row in the Olympics, and she was dismayed to discover that women's rowing was not an Olympic sport. Because the Men's National Rowing Organization, then called the National Association of Amateur Oars Men, was not interested in fostering women's rowing, she teamed up with 2 male coaches on the West Coast, Ted Nash and Ed Lickus, to start the National Women's Rowing Association, which began organizing national regattas. In 1965, the women from PGRC were the first women's crew, indeed the only women's crew, to race in the first head of the Charles. Then they competed in 2 national championships sponsored by the new National Women's Rowing Association. But how the PGRC women got to Vichy is what you came to hear, and it's an amazing story. No matter that they came in 6th, last actually against the formidably tall, highly trained, and well-supported Eastern European crews. In the end, the presence of American women rowers helped push the International Olympic Committee to make women's rowing an Olympic sport in 1976. Their story of breaking into an all-male sport will hopefully resonate with others who today are also struggling with issues of inclusion. Jinx Becker, in a poem she wrote for the 50th anniversary gathering of the Vichy women, wrote, "We were in the vanguard, unknowingly riding the wave of a new era, overlooked in the wake of those females who followed afterward to paint their own portrait." So tonight we'll start with hearing from Jinx. Jinx, you watched the 1962 regatta on the Schuylkill River when the Russians came to Philadelphia, and something clicked inside you. What was that like, and how did you get into rowing?
Well, that regatta in 1962 was probably the most exciting sporting event I have seen in my life. The riverbanks were packed with people. There was kind of an anticipation, an excitement in the air. I had no idea what the sport of rowing was all about. I couldn't have looked at the boats and the races and told you what they were. I didn't know anybody. But the feeling pervading that area, near the grandstand and all the way down the river that afternoon, was like nothing I had experienced before. It was just special. And I've never been to a sporting event since then that made me feel that same way. So, but of course there are no women in the regatta. It didn't even occur to me that women might be able to row or participate. And so I went home that day. I had just graduated, I was 17 years old. I had just graduated from high school a couple of weeks earlier. And I was not college bound. I was going to get a job and go to night school. And during the late part of 62, an older woman that I was working with, who was part-time, and I were chatting, and I talked to her about how exciting I thought this regatta was. What a great sport. There was so much about it that really appealed to me. And she said, "Oh, well, women do row." She said, "I have a cousin named Lucille Lena." She said she was married to a Vesper rower, and she belongs to the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club. And I was very surprised to hear that. She said, "If you want," she said, "I'll get in touch with her and get you some information to see what you have to do to join." So a couple of weeks passed, and she got back to me one day, and she said, I talked to my cousin, and she gave me a name and phone number for someone for you to contact. It was one of the early founders of the club. Her name is Ruth Robinhold. She is expecting your call, so call her and talk to her. So I did that, and Ruth invited me down to the boathouse, showed me around. There was a meeting, some other things going on, introduced me to the captain, Joanne Wright, at the time, and we set up a time for me to come back. And at one point I was put in a gig, held off the dock, and I was taught to feather square the oar, come up on the slide, pull up with your toes. So we went through the exercises being held in the gig off of the dock. And we did that a couple times, and then I got turned over to Evelyn Bergman, Bernadette Dubek, and Ronnie Soha, who are all scholars. In fact, for the most part, everyone then back in '63 was a scholar, because we had 2 quads, as I recall, a double, a single, a gig, and a wherry, and that was about it. I think there was a 4, perhaps, as well. But so we'd go out in the quad. I'd get stuck in the middle with another newbie. About that time, a little later on, the Carol Schuler and Margie came on the scene. And when we competed, when we raced, it was in match races between these people. There were no other clubs that we were competing against. We just here it was the two quads competing against each other in the match races. A little more time passed, and Ted Nash came on the scene in Philadelphia about 1964. He'd been Olympian, and he came to be the freshman coach at the University of Pennsylvania. His wife happened to have been a good rower at Lake Washington Rowing Club. She joined PVRC, and then there was a move was afoot to get competition. And Nash secured the use of the tanks down at Penn for us. We would go down there, and that was sweep rowing, of course. So we would go down a couple nights a week through the winter, do the sweep rowing. And then, lo and behold, in '65, that's when things started happening and rolling along. Ed Lickett.
I'm sorry, Jinx. We've got to get to everybody and your
Yes,
story.
I apologize.
So I'm going to let Penny pick up the baton here, because Penny, you had a story about what your first impression of Boathouse Row was when you came down, and Jinx was the one who recruited you, I think. Penny, are you there? Penny, unmute if you're there.
Here we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. I was in Strawbridge's and the Cherry Hill Mall, and Jinx was there at the same time, and she took the fact that I was 6 foot tall, and she was recruiting for rowers. And I didn't know this story until 2 years ago at our reunion. And it took her a half hour to get her guts up to come and approach me to see if I would be interested in rowing. And I said, sure, it sounds good to me. Being an athlete. And I drove over to Boathouse Row from New Jersey, where I lived, the very next day, parked my car in front of PGRC, and got out of my car and saw all these tall men rowing, running down the row. And everyone was taller than the next, and my being 6 foot tall. And I thought, my God, I died and went to heaven. This is the place for me. So that was fun.
That's a great story, Penny.
Yeah.
So that was your first impression of the row. And do you have any memory of the first time you got in a boat?
The first time that I got in a boat probably was with Nancy Farrell in a gig. I was in a gig first, and then after that, Nancy and I rowed together in a pair, and we were good. We were very good at what we did, and it was a good combination. But I spent a lot of time on the river in freezing cold weather with ice on the oars in the middle of the winter, getting ready for the spring. But it was fun. I loved it. So
I want to turn this over to Ernie. So all of you women rowed, or many of you rowed in the national competition, and then came the time that you guys went to Canada, St. Catherine. So Ernie, can you tell what happened there? Ernie, are you there? Unmute wherever you are.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
To kind of put this into perspective of where we were in 1967, Title IX didn't come in until 1972, 5 years later. And the President of the United States was Lyndon Johnson at the time. Ruth Bader Ginsburg hadn't even pleaded her first case to the Supreme Court, which was in 1973. So we were dealing with an entire culture that basically said women shouldn't even be on the Schuylkill River rowing because they're taking up space that men should have. So here we were, we arrived back from the 1967 Women's Nationals. We had won every heavyweight event: the single, the pair, the double, the quad, the 4, the 8, and we cleaned up. We missed the point trophy by 1 point, and I remember that bitterly, but that's the way it went. So we came back, and I'm going to call my mother Mama Bear, which makes this a little bit easier, and my father Papa Bear, because all three of us were known as Ernie Bear. So we had had a long train ride back from California and a lot of time to talk. And my mother came up with this idea of trying to find out whether the American women could possibly go to Vichy. So we met with John Carlin, who was the American representative to FISA, who had to approve any entry. And in that meeting with John Carlin at his house, he got approached about whether he would approve the entry. And he said, no, he said, I understand what your women have done. This is marvelous. But the United States and the other free countries do not want to give the Soviet countries, the communists, any more opportunity to win medals at our expense. He said, no, the American women are not in the same class as the Europeans. It takes your girls, 12 women to carry a boat. And over in Europe, 4 Bulgarians carry the boat and the other 4 carry the oars. And at that point, my mother responded and said, well, yes, John, the reason why we do that is we have to be careful with the boat because it's borrowed equipment. And he said, no, I will not approve the entry. So the clock clicked, and come the late part of June, we got an invitation from Craig Swayze, who was the editor of one of the Canadian papers in Ontario. And what he wanted to see was, St. Catharines rather, and he wanted to see that women would get started rowing in Canada. So he thought having the United States women come up to do an exhibition row would be a great idea. So we all talked about it and said, yeah, that would be really fun. So we went up to Canada for what we thought was going to be an exhibition row. And it ended up, they had changed it into an exhibition race. And the boat we were racing against was against men who had, some of them who had just retired from international competition. Tommy Keller was in the other boat. And they set the race at 500 meters. And I remember Margie said, guys, we got to be ready. They're going to jump the start, so we're going to jump the start even faster and get ahead of them. We said, yes, Marge. So sure enough, we jumped the start. We got the lead on them, and it took them 500 meters to mow us down. So we crossed the finish line. Now remember, this is 1967. And someone in the men's boat says, let's pull together and exchange shirts. And we all said, no. Then they said, well, how about a kiss? So we pulled the boats together. And I remember Penny Henwood got to kiss Tommy Keller because she was in 6th seat. So at that point, we got invited to come to the referees party that night. And that's where the world changed.
We had a blast.
At the referees party, Tommy Keller, actually, we were standing talking to him. And he turned and said to my mother, Mama Bear, I want you girls to come to Vichy. And we said, oh, Tom, we can't do that. They said, Tom Carlin won't approve the entry, plus the entries are closed. And he said, Ernestine, I'll take care of John Carlin. You take care of the whole logistics and the money, because we said we don't have any money. So my mother turned to my father and said, Ernie, who is that man from the National Rowing Foundation? He might be willing to fund the girls. He said, oh, Horace Davenport. Oh, he's right over there. So takes Mama Bear over, introduces her to Horace Davenport, and said, we've been invited to come to Vichy, but the girls have already spent all their own money with financing the trip to California for the Nationals, with financing the trip to Canada. Is there any way the National Rowing Foundation would back the women? And he said, I'm really sorry, but I cannot do that. He said, if I were to ever fund a women's crew, I would lose the majority of my contributors. We can't do it. So he said, well, how much money would you need? And my mother said, how much? And I said, $6,800. And he said, I'll loan you $6,800, but you cannot tell anybody I did it. And he said, you have a year to pay it back. So at that point, my mother said to Tommy Keller, well, it's going to be too late to enter because now we had the money. And she said, no, if you look over at that buffet over there, we're in a hotel room, there are entry blanks. And Ernie said, well, there's no way we can get it to the secretary in time. And he said, well, yes, there is. He's standing right over there. And my mother turned to my father and said, how much money do you have in your pocket? And my dad goes, okay. So we went and she said, who do I put in the boat? I said, put everybody down you can think so that we have everybody entered. And we also entered a quad because we thought that would be a good idea for a warm-up race. and literally filled out this entry blank. Now, the girls hadn't even agreed to this yet, and walked over and handed this into the secretary, and then told everybody we needed to have a meeting. And we went back to the hotel room and we had a meeting and explained this invitation we had received, and we took a vote. There were 9 people in the vote, and 5 of them said yes and 4 said no. But those 4 have a lot to be thanked for, because they agreed to go with what the team wanted to do in a true democracy, in a vote. So that's how we got there. And that's the end of mine. Thank you.
Unmute, unmute.
I should know better. Janice, can you tell us some of the financial problems that you had individually? Because it wasn't just about the 6,800 that you needed. It affected, all of, more than that. Are you there, Janice? Unmute.
Unmute.
There you are. Almost. While she's unmuting, I can tell a little bit about her. So some of the women on the boat lost jobs because they couldn't take the time off to either do the national races or they didn't have the money to for airplanes and traveling across the country for the national races. And so there were financial issues. There was issues with the Janice has a great story about the Vera Scarves. Janice, can you try to get in? Maybe we'll come back to Janice when she figures it out.
Janice is via phone. So we keep going in and out. But when we do have her, I'll interrupt you, okay?
That's great. In the meantime, Sophie, you went and you carried a secret with you, Sophie Socha. Can you tell us about that? Unmute yourself, Sophie. You're much better at rowing than they are at Zoom.
There you are. Where do I start? I was bent on being in that 8 no matter what. I lived and breathed it. And then I found myself pregnant. So I didn't tell my husband, I didn't tell the crew, I didn't tell anybody. I thought that I told everybody when I got back, but I went when I was pregnant. I know that it wasn't the thing to do then, because believe it or not, when you had a baby in 1968, you ended up in the hospital for a week. So I felt fine, all was well, and nobody killed me, but I figured if I told the crew ahead of time, somebody would kick me out of the boat. The coach would kick me out of the boat. So I didn't tell them.
Sophie, do you remember any of the stories about how you guys pulled together your uniforms? Or maybe Jinx wants to pop in on that one?
Oh, sure, but I'll give it to Jinx because she was instrumental in getting some of it together. Oh, I was, with reference to almost losing your job, I was one of them. I almost lost my job, but I got the time off. Go ahead, Jinx.
We each had a $600 budget or amount allotted to us for our expenses. And of course, nobody was going to supply us with a uniform. We decided perhaps what we should wear would be red, white, and blue. We already had a navy blue woolen blazer that had a PGRC patch on it from the previous year that each of us had purchased. So we figured we'd use that. We would get a white dress, which turned out to be something a nurse or a waitress would have worn. We bought it from a uniform supply store. So we each had the same kind of dress, but in the appropriate sizes. We had blue blazer, white dress, but we needed some other things for color. Well, Janice was never a shrinking violet. And she went to John Wanamaker's, and lo and behold, she was on the ground floor, and one of the salespeople from the Vera Scarves company was there. And Janice struck up a conversation with them, was talking about this girls' rowing club, and we had to put together a uniform, and wouldn't it be great if we had a red, white, and blue scarf, which you just happen to have. And she persuaded him to donate a scarf for each of us in the crew. So now we had a blue blazer, a white dress, a red, white, and blue scarf. And then she also negotiated the purchase of a red woolen blazer to complete the outfit. We wore our own shoes, of course, and so forth. But you could say we put it together on the cheap, but it was the appropriate colors. It was the look that we wanted to have. And that's what we went to. It was our travel uniform. It was our parade uniform. So that was our story for our uniform for Vichy.
So
I'll make sure I bring that picture of the uniform up. But I do have Janice. I'm going to try to do it through my phone. So Janice, go ahead and talk and see if everybody can hear you.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I looked up Vera Scarves because I distinctly remember it was a Vera scarf, not knowing that this woman was famous, and these are designer scarves that we all had, pure silk, and they still are for sale on Etsy. They're called collector 70s Vera scarves. They go for $70 to $80 a piece. Unbelievable. And we got them for free. But I don't remember getting the berets. Maybe I got the berets. I just thought it would be cool to have red berets. And but other than that, the only other thing I was going to say, we strove very hard to save money because we didn't have a lot of money. So we carried our oars as part of our luggage. I can distinctly remember carrying the oars through the airport and the looks we were getting.
Yeah.
And that was part of your 40 pounds free luggage.
And across the Champs-Élysées, remember crossing that with oars?
And then I also lost my job.
So what did they say to you at your job? I mean,
well, I had taken time off to go to Oakland, and I took time off to go to St. Catharines. Then I come back, and I was a new employee, and I said, "Oh, I need 2 weeks to go to France," and they said, "You're just going to go." You know?
So this is at a time when a lot of the men had support, and you guys didn't have support. I think Barbara had a story, and I'm sorry she's not on right now, about, I think it was Barbara, about the locker situation. Do any of you remember the lockers that you were allowed to use and weren't allowed to use? No? So she said that the US team, which I think was Harvard, is that right? Who was there, the men, every country had their own locker area, but they wouldn't let you guys be in the US locker area, even though you wouldn't be there at the same time. And so you got to use the Australian lockers. Is that story that you guys remember? No?
I don't remember.
Another example. So another question for Janice.
Dottie,
yeah.
I do remember we shared the lockers with the Australian team and the American team. We were all there at different times.
Okay, so you weren't bounced out by the US guys?
No, okay. But the US guys weren't allowed to talk to us.
So Janice, you have a story, I think, about a cultural shock.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys didn't speak French, and there were some things that happened there that you were surprised about. You want to talk about that?
Well, we stayed in a pension. It was very charming, and we're in a room. There were a couple girls to a bedroom. Each bedroom had a bidet. None of us had ever seen a bidet, and we didn't know what it was for. And we couldn't figure it out. And we washed our feet in it. I had
We still don't know what it's
that's the
for.
only thing we could figure to do.
So I think at this point I'm going to turn this over to Carol to talk a little bit about the impact of Vichy on all of you going forward. So Carol, Bauer?
Yeah, sure thing. It's been great to see you guys all again. And this really brings back a lot of memories. I know when I was sitting on the line in the Olympics in 1984 in LA, going for the gold medal. By the time my generation had come around, we were actually aspiring to win the race as opposed to just getting into the race. But we couldn't have done it without that spark of the Vichy Eight in 1967. It had to start someplace. And then from that spark, then the organizers come in. Then they're the ones that start to make things happen. They have the vision, and they start to organize the rowing foundation for us and the national championships, and then to build a little bit more on the, I think at that time it was the European championships, and by the time I came along, it was the world championships. And then you also had to have the people who just wouldn't say no, or wouldn't take no for an answer, to keep pushing the woman ahead. So certainly when we were sitting on the line in 1984, we were riding on the backs of a lot of women that came before us, and certainly this aid is the group that got us started. And in a way, it was talked about in terms of changing the course of women's rowing. I think they started the course. I think they're the ones that put the boat in the water for women's rowing. And then we all started to build on that. So we owe you all a gratitude of debt, certainly, because what was hard for you made it possible for us. It's still hard every way, and everybody makes their contribution along the way. But I just want to share, one of the most wonderful moments of my life was we had won the gold medal in 1984, and then the following fall, the U.S. rowing convention was in Philadelphia, and women had never been inducted into the Rowing Hall of Fame yet. So the women's eight, the gold medal eight, along with Ernestine Bear, Mama Bear, were being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so we got to stand up along with Ernestine and receive that first honor. But even better than that, the next day, one of our rowers had to leave early. So there were 7 of us plus our coxswain, but we wanted to go out for a row again. And so we got Ernestine to fill in for us. So she, we had just won the gold medal. I'm not sure of her age. I know she needed a little help getting in because she had injured her ankle. But we went out for a row. I was the 3 seat, she was the 2 seat. And we were to swing along, and she was right in time with us. And before we came back to the boathouse, Betsy, our coxswain, said, Ernestine, is there anything you want to do? And she said, oh, I want to do a racing start. And so we got set up for a racing start, and Betsy said, okay, half pressure, half speed. And so we went off the line, half pressure, half speed for 10 strokes, and then we let it run. And it was a beautiful start. She was right with us, catch, release, everything. And then after that, she said, come on, girls, let me see a real start. And so Betsy said, okay. And now we were coming off the line at 48 strokes a minute. And so, we sat there. She said, partay. We were off high 40s for 10 strokes, let it run. She was right there with us the whole way. And to be with someone who had essentially got everything going for us, and to actually be in the boat with her was just, I still remember the chilly, sunny morning that we did that. So I have some questions here. Is Marjorie on yet? Oh, there you are. Okay, good. there's a lot of good experiences, but you describe as being that year as being one of the best years of your life. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? You gotta unmute.
There we go. Hi. I really think it was. I had an amazing group of ladies. I think you can tell just by the ones that have spoken so far. We had fun. We traveled together. There were a lot of regattas that we went to that were outside of Philadelphia. We never really had any disagreements. I think it was an unusual group of ladies. And we all wanted the same thing. We all went after the same thing. And even though we're in different parts of the country, I'm in Michigan, and I know Jinx is in Florida, and the girls are just all over. We've got one in Australia, but I think we all feel that feeling to one another, that it was really a wonderful group of people. We had a lot of fun. We worked really hard, but it was the best opportunity and time. It was just, every year that you go through, things certainly change, and distances are a big part of that right now. But when we get together, and we try to get together every 2 years, I don't know if we'll be able to do it this year or not because of COVID, but we just start talking where we left off the 2 years prior, and we can talk about the wonderful stories that we had and the wonderful things that we did. It was just a lot of fun. I had the same group of women for 3 years, and starting in '65 when we raced mills when they came into Philadelphia for the first time. In '66, we're the first Women's National Rowing Association regatta, where we took 2 gold medals in that one. And then certainly in '67, when we won everything, and then went to Vichy. We've had some wonderful stories, and I love every one of these women. And that's why I honestly felt they were the best years. We've been through marriages, children, deaths, not only of members of our crew, but of spouses, and just a lot of changes in our lives. But we're all the same, and I love all of these women. They're a great group of gals.
We love you too, Margie.
Thank you. I miss you guys.
Right back at you.
And you guys started, but then there's so many ways that you carried it forward for other generations to come. And, not just being in a boat and rowing, but, for some people getting off and coaching. Liz Bergen, I know that you're, one of the coaches, but you also became the Commodore of the Schuylkill Navy. And you're one of those who wouldn't take no for an answer. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, wait a minute. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that we were trained to do, we used to attend, Mama Bear impressed us with this, that we couldn't just be rowers, but we had to participate in the sport. So we used to go to the annual meeting every year. At the time it was in New York. So this carryover, we took back to the club. It was a women's club. We were the officers. We helped run the club, everything about it. So one year we were told, they asked the girls club, the Schuylkill Navy asked the girls club, please send a delegate to the meeting. And we did. And they asked me to be the delegate. It was a great idea. I went, listened. Second time I went to a meeting, the secretary didn't show up. John Schnorr was Commodore, and he said, oh, well, we have someone here from the girls club, Liz. Would you take the minutes? So the secretaries stopped coming, so I was taking the minutes for every meeting. So the next year, at the time, Girls Club wasn't even a member of the Schuylkill Navy. So the next year, at the December meeting, the first thing they did was vote the Girls Club to be a full-time member. And then they ran me to be an official secretary of the Schuylkill Navy. So I was secretary and worked my way up. I was also treasurer. I was vice commodore before I was commodore. And that was a new thing in Philadelphia.
Right. But then there were many women commodores to follow you. You were, again, made the breakthrough. So, and I did want to mention, you guys were talking about losing your jobs, so you could have the opportunity to compete. Actually, my competition launched my career as a rowing coach. So after the 1980 Olympics, I got hired on as the freshman coach at Yale University, and it's been 40 years now of coaching. So, and it's just what you guys, it wasn't just rowing opportunities, it's also other opportunities that stem from rowing that have been, afforded to many women that have come along after you guys. So, and then, I don't want to finish this without mentioning, we also had to have, the men who helped us get there. They were the ones that knew how to row already. They were the ones in a system, but it was, for the good graces of some of the guys, certainly not all of the guys, but some of the guys helped us, helped you guys get started, which helped us get started. And I think Ted Nash was one.
First one.
All sorts of them. I know some of them are here watching tonight, which is nice. So we certainly appreciate that also. I'm trying to think. I wanted to ask you guys, and maybe somebody can answer this. Tell me about your hardest workout. What was the one that you came off the water and, what did you do that you just felt like that was the most grueling workout?
It wasn't a workout. It was a quad race in Seattle. After it was done, I couldn't get out of the boat. I was just spent. I had no legs, no strength left in me. I thought that's it. I'm going to die right there.
Did you guys lift weights and run miles and do things like that to cross train?
No, did not lift weights. I didn't.
No,
we didn't even run that much either. No. We rode.
How about Lemon Hill?
John Quinn
I didn't even do that.
John Quinn used to have us do jumpies with weights in our arms, Penn. But that was all. Do you remember that?
It was strictly rowing as far as what I remember. I mean, we didn't run the course or anything like that like the guys did. It was just strictly rowing, and every day, so many miles, and we switched seats on top of one another and everything like that.
Did you go in the morning and the afternoon?
Yeah, we would have morning, especially on the weekends, we'd have morning and later in the afternoon. But during the week, it was always after work time, 6 o'clock or so.
And did you train all winter too?
Yeah, we trained in the inside at University of Pennsylvania. We trained on the water with freezing water on our oars in the middle of the winter.
So I think Faye has a story about Faye Bardman learned to row in 6 weeks and then went off racing. Faye, do you want to talk about what that training was like? Are you there, Faye? You can unmute. So she was an athlete, a multiple sport athlete, and ended up not going to Vichy because she was on the U.S. field hockey team as
yes,
well.
I was a seasonal oarswoman. I played basketball with Canada, Mexico, and United States, and I was barred from the Olympic Committee because the political person in Kansas City said I was a professional. I coached and taught at Penn, and I was not. And John Kelly said, "Oh, I'll stand up for you," but I didn't choose to follow through with that. And then in the fall, I played field hockey. In the summer, I did softball and archery. And in the spring, I did rowing. And it was a unique experience. I went to, in 1966, I had rowed for 6 weeks. I had 42 blisters. They were bleeding. It was so hard to hold on to the oar. I didn't know that you were allowed to relax. I didn't know how anyway. And I was the best crab recover person in the boat. I could catch a crab and not miss a beat. Of course, we weren't rowing at 48. And they all knew it says, oh, she did it again. And then they'd drive extra hard the next stroke. And that was exciting. And I know the first nationals was in Seattle. And Marge called for 20, and I gave her 20, and I did not have one left. Carol asked, what was your hardest race? And I caught a crab, and we won anyway. So that was a terribly big reward. And I was also in the wherry race there, and at 500 meters, I was stuck on the buoy ball at 500 meters. And the referee took pity on me, and I almost finished. I mean, I finished really coming on strong, so that was exciting. And I did get rid of my nerves, and that was a good plan the coach had. So I was ready for the 8. And then when it came time to go to Vichy, I had already committed to the United States field hockey team to tour France, Germany, and England. So I could not do both, so I had to give up my seat.
So Faye, was field hockey pretty established? Was it already a system that you just joined on with at that
Well,
time?
it was very well established, and it's a decline now because in the Olympic Committee, only one member, and it's a man member, and men don't play field hockey in the United States, and field hockey's gone downhill in the United States. It was very large, and all high school, middle school kids played field hockey. They didn't play soccer then, so it was quite an honor, yeah.
I played right wing in high
That
school.
means you were fast.
I played fullback.
There you go.
Way halfback.
So a couple of you mentioned the impression you had at Vichy being with these really well-trained, huge, professional Eastern Europeans, and also the sense at the time with the Iron Curtain still coming back with an appreciation for our freedom. Does anybody want to talk about that impression that you had?
The one Russian woman approached me and wanted to know if I knew how she could leave the country and defect. But we were careful not to get into political discussions, and I had to discourage her. She's still in touch with me, and years later, we don't talk about it, but there was no way that it was way above my head, and we weren't there for that reason, and it was too touchy to have around. They weren't, from what I remember, they weren't encouraged to speak to us or be with us. They were with us for a period of time, especially after practices. We would just be sitting there waiting. There's a picture of that at PGRC where a bunch of us are just sitting. But, and then I remember the Bulgarian team walked over to a 4 or a quad, and 4 of them picked up the boat with one hand and put it in the water. And I have to tell you, I was dumbstruck when I saw how strong they were.
I actually befriended a Russian girl that I corresponded with for 3 or 4 years. Her name was Sophie, and she was from the Ukraine. And she sent me a letter the last that I heard from her that she was going to warm country to practice for rowing in the winter. So they were subsidized at that time, as we were not.
We're subsidized, yes.
One of the things that none of us knew was that a lot of the women over in international competition were on steroids. And of course that's come out in later years, but they were unbelievable. I remember that Bulgarian four you remembered. Their legs looked like tree trunks. They were 6 foot and built like men. They were incredible. Incredible.
And huge, tall, big.
Anybody have other stories that they want to tell before we open up to Q&A from anybody else in the...
One of the cutest things that I remembered about Vichy was Nancy Farrell at the time. Maybe she had just turned 16. That prior screen had a picture of her. And we were actually walking down the street and getting ready to get on the bus to go over to the rowing venue. And there was a family walking down the street. And she turned and she said, "That little boy's speaking French." She was amazed at that. And it was just so typical Nancy. It was really fun. It was quite an experience.
So, anybody have any questions from the audience? Or any of you want to tell a little bit more?
Come on, Jimmy D, you were there. Say something.
Now I'm unmuted. I do remember. It's like it was a year for first. I mean, it was the first year that Chip and I went over to the World Junior Championships. I'm not sure. Maybe Gardner or Stan knows, but I don't think the NRF really came into existence until around 1966, 1967. So, all those people that were there to promote the sport. I look at this collages of people in front of me, and, you're going to love me here saying this, Carol, but you and Jen are probably the youngest people on the call, and if we look back at where our sport has gone in the past 60 years, it's incredible. And that's what I think is incredible about evenings like tonight. Like Ernie said, you think of guys like Craig Swayze up in St. Catharines, who was the sports writer for the St. Catharines Standard, Tommy Keller, Horace Davenport, all of these guys helped it happen. They all paid it forward because they loved the sport so much, and I think you have to look to those guys as being activists like the women of '67, because if that didn't happen, the United States wouldn't be reaping the medals that they've been reaping in women's rowing for the past 3 or 4 quadrennials. It's just been incredible where the sport has gone, but things just don't happen to happen. People have to make them happen, and people on this call made things happen. I remember being on the trip. I was the spare as well. I was the spare sculler, and I can remember walking around town with the manager for the Harvard team. He was just an undergraduate from Harvard, but he spoke French, so I was tailing along with him. And there was really an anti-American feeling in Vichy. They really weren't keen to Americans at all. And a big epiphany for me was some old guys started screaming at us from a 3rd-story building and came running down. And with him, he had a newspaper from VE Day, Victory in Europe, when the war was finally over. And this old timer remembered that, and he remembered what America did for his country. And I know the Harvard manager took that newspaper home with him, and I thought that was pretty special. The other thing that I remember is Ivanov, the great sculler, coming off the water and smoking a cigarette. I thought, man, this guy must be good. He's smoking cigarettes right after the race, But it was a good trip, and you look where we are today. People have paid it forward, and we have a great sport to look back on.
Inclusion is a big issue still, as other groups try to get on the river and enter into society in other ways. I don't know if any of the members of the Vichy Eight have any thoughts on how to make people feel more welcome, which is an effort that I think Boathouse Row is attempting to do. Anybody thinking, any thoughts on that? No. I know there's an initiative going on in the clubs to try and bring in, more people of color and others. I don't know. John, you're on the call. John Izzard, do you want to?
Yeah, I had to turn my mic on. I think from 1973 until the present, it has really expanded quite well. I've always felt comfortable, 99.9 times. I can't say enough about Undine and the other clubs that always supported me, and especially my son, who was the first African-American youth rower to win the school boys championship and the Catholic League championship, and do quite well. I believe that those of us, those of you who are rowers, come with a special personality. I've been in a lot of sports. I went out for professional football. As some of you know, I was a whitewater canoer and instructor. And each sport that I've involved myself in has always shown that those who stick with it have a particular type of personality. They just don't want to be seen or be there. They commit to the activity and the culture. And those who don't stay, they're temporary in most other activities also. But I feel continue the welcoming attitude and with the smiles, and it will grow, just as you, as women, have experienced that. Minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, they will also be welcomed into the fold. So they say just be yourself, but we all have some degree of resistance. I mean, it's part of our DNA. And as someone told me, and I always think about Jimmy Barker, who I love, just spoke to him the other day. The character comes out during the most difficult times, as some of you have expressed, doing those hard rows, those workouts, going over the Lemon Hill and running backwards. Jimmy Barker would say, anybody can run forward, do it backwards. And it takes a particular type of person to stick with it. Folks start golf, they quit when they find out it takes a little more sophistication. I told a story about taking my son out in a single, and it was Whitecap Day, and Jimmy Barker made sure we were there. And my son said, Mr. Barker sucks, until he won one of the championship races. A lot of effort. It's an invisible sport because they only see you when you're coming past the stands. It's different than baseball, football, and basketball, which is in a particular control zone. Rowing is not. You have an entire lineage of time there. So we're looking for, as I share with folks, those who have a particular type of personality. And if you don't have that personality, like Jim said, move on to another sport.
Well said. Thank you.
It's Ernie. I think your point is that we're a team, and I think the Vichy Eight shows that what we did as a team, and it has united us over the last 50 odd years, because that spirit of team will always be there. And for that reason, I think we have never looked at inclusion as being a problem. The biggest problem was figuring out who would be the best person in the seat. And it didn't matter what color or race or age they were. If they could pull their weight and made that boat go faster, they were in the boat. And that was what the team did. And people would sacrifice, saying, oh, the boat's faster without me, and they'd step aside and let that other person in. So I think it's a unique sport for that reason, because the individual disappears.
Exactly.
Hey, Jinx, this is Rick. I wonder if you could tell us why, because when I first met you, I was at, because I'd been at Malta Boat Club, but you were at Vesper Boat Club, and you were rowing there, and then you migrated up to PGRC, or were you rowing kind of back and forth? I think you were getting coaching at Vesper, or what was this, or what was the story there?
Well, very quickly, at the 67 National Championships in Oakland, we were looking to get as many points as we could, accumulate as many points, set as many wins as we could, so we could take the trophy for the overall trophy for the regatta. So I was in the 8, of course, and Mr. Bear, Papa Bear, had said to me, "Well, Jinx," he was putting together various other boats, and he said, "You've rowed the single some, haven't you?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, how about if we put you in the single?" Okay. And maybe we come third, get us some points somehow that way. Anyhow, the single race went off. I was in it in Oakland, and it wasn't pretty. The conditions were terrible. There was a crosswind. One oar was up in the air, the other was in the water. It was a struggle that day. But anyhow, I finished first. And shortly after the race, Farrell, who had been one of the founding members of the Girls Rowing Club, and whose daughter Nancy was in the 8, came over to me afterwards, and I'm sure she wasn't trying to be mean or ugly, but she said to me, "Well, congratulations, Jinx, you got a first place in the single." She said, "We never thought you had it in you." Just deflated everything, and I thought, well, that explains a number of things to me then, and I thought, I'm never going to have a whole lot of success at PGRC if they don't think I have up here or in my heart to be successful. So I started looking around. I had an opportunity to use a single out of Vesper. Didn't have any coaching there, so that was in 1968. And in 69 also, until they established a women's program in 1970. And I was just up there on my own for 2 years.
We're using Gus Constant's boat, is that right? Weren't you using Gus's boat?
Yes, Gus Constant allowed me to use his single. So I had to kind of tread lightly there because no one was, you could just tell who liked you, and who did not, who to steer clear of in terms of the young men that were at the club. And so I just hung in there. I came back in the shadows and stayed.
We're talking about first. So Anita was really the first woman to step foot into Vesper unofficially before Gus went out and started recruiting others who ended up trying to train for the Olympics. So it's a great story, another first.
Dottie, we have a question from Alexandra Mielbrat. Alexandra, I might have butchered your name there, but please unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've unmuted myself. Just before I ask my question, just quickly to acknowledge paying it forward. Just as you, the Vichy Eight, paid it forward to Carol Bauer. Carol's my college coach at the University of Pennsylvania. And she paid it forward to me. So thank you, Carol. I'm calling in from New Zealand, where I am rowing again. I've gone in and out of rowing all my whole life, but it's been a huge, huge part of my life. And I'm rowing again, and very happily so. My doubles partner is also on the call. And my question to the Vichy Eight is, are you still rowing?
Sophie?
Sophie, you need to unmute.
Okay, here I am. For me, yes, I'm still there. And yes, I'm still rowing, except for this last year where I didn't have 1 mile to my name. And there's nothing like having river water in your veins and just being on that river is what keeps me going. It's almost frightening how much I love the sport.
And Sophie has been president for many years of the Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club, so you paid it back that way as well, Sophie, or paid it forward, or paid it a lot of ways, just doing that hard work of running a club.
I love our members, and I love this group especially.
And Sophie is very, very helpful to other clubs. Thank you, Sophie.
Oh, you're welcome.
I have something. I had a car accident, so I was retired for everything. And I decided I would coach. So I started crew at Baldwin School. And Jim Glavin helped me the first year because I was just fresh out of surgery, and they won the girls' nationals, the high school nationals. Next year I coached, we won again, and we did well. But anyway, one of the things I thought was very humorous, we had no boat. Baldwin School, I started the crew, but we had no boat to row. So I went down to Ted Nash and I said, do you have a cheap boat I can afford? He said, I'll sell you this Pocock 8 for $1,000. So I said, well, sounds like a deal to me. And then I had no place to put it. So I owned this boat, and I had girls who wanted to row, but no place to put the boat. So one Saturday morning, Liz Bergens, Michael, and my husband, Bill, went down to the girls' club, and they built a bay that would hold 8. And we quickly that day painted it green so the city wouldn't see that we illegally had added to the boat club. So it is a motivating sport.
And we thank you for it.
Well, it was scary that day because I was sure I was going to get fined, and that's the way it was. But this sport is fantastic. It's one of the few when you actually master it a bit more than I had the first year. When you learn you can relax, and I've played many, many sports. There's nothing quite like the run under the boat when you've just had a beautiful stroke. And when you all do it together, it just gives you duck bumps all over, goose pimples, all over your body. And there is no other sport that does that.
Well, it was a thrill when we got together after a certain number of years, and all of us, Nancy Farrell was still alive, and we all were in that boat. And when we came back just after the Girard Avenue Bridge, it felt like a dream.
Yeah, I lived in Kansas then, and I was going to start a crew in Kansas. I saw in the Kansas City Star, the newspaper, Jogstetter was coaching Kansas City something then, University of Kansas or something. And I saw the blade work in this picture. I thought, oh my, they are really terrible. But then I had a newborn and I didn't get there. But it's a motivating sport, that's for sure. And we also ran the Nationals in Philadelphia after that too, and that was kind of fun. And one of the big deals was you needed money to support all the medals and everything. So what we did at the Girls Club, Lois Trench Hines and I were co-chairs. We sent the middle-aged and older women out to sell ads because they really knew how to do it. And we made a bunch of money on that national.
Give it to the women.
Yeah.
And any other thoughts or comments?
No, I have a kind of I think it's humorous anecdotal story about some of the other personalities along the boathouse row. In the early to mid 60s, there were two young men that were rowing out of Penn AC. They were Tom Rafferty, the late Tom Rafferty, and Vincent Bindo. And they were truly different personalities, but they were always affable, always friendly. When you talk about inclusion, we didn't feel included early on. We were more like a novelty, and some men and young men just objected to having women row. Well, anyhow, Rafferty and Bindo were very personality. They would always stop and chat and talk with the pastor on the row. But invariably, Vincent Bindo, in talking, somewhere in the course of the conversation, he would say, well, I'm very broad-minded. And then he'd do a thing with his eyebrows like Groucho Marx. And it wasn't just once or twice, it was often. So, you know, all you could do was roll your eyes and just move on. Well, after Vichy, I had gotten a second job for some of the winter months to earn some extra money waiting tables over at Stouffer's in Penn Center. And the dining room I worked in sold cocktails, offered cocktails for the patrons. And so they had a regular bar in that one dining room, and then they had the service bar at the end of it. And one evening, I had gone to get a cocktail for one of the customers, and there was a man sitting very close to the service bar, and he was having a one-way conversation with the bartender. And at one point, when I had gone over to place an order for one of my customers, he turned to me and he said, how about this young lady? I bet she's very broad-minded. Now, I'm recalling the way Vince Bindo, years earlier, had always said, oh, well, I'm very broad-minded with the eyebrows. The only time in my life I ever had a snappy answer, and I said, no, I only like men. And I walked away.
Anyway, that's a fun story. This is Janice. You want to say something? Unmute.
I don't think she's going to be able to. Janice, if you can write it in the chat room, can you? No.
Well, can I speak for you, Janice?
Oh, Jinx knows exactly what you're going to say.
I think that Janice is going to say that it was the Rafferty-Bindo combination that got her to Philadelphia Girls Rowing Club. She saw them at a dance in South Philadelphia. They noticed she was a tall girl and said, you need to go to PGRC. So they introduced her, Vince and Tom Rafferty.
And see, that is friendship right there, being able to finish each other's sentences.
Well, all of us know that having known Vince Bindo and Rafferty myself, they were infamous for their unbelievable, I don't know what the best word is, lack of tact sometimes. And they were all probably graced every different program along Boathouse Row and then went to Upper Merion at one point. But they were two characters that were just jinxed. I agree with you. They were just like crazy people. But they loved rowing. And they would made the sport so colorful in Philadelphia in a lot of ways. So, you know, those are the kinds of stories, those characters like that, I think is worth talking about.
Well, you know, it's funny, politically, Penn AC was the most supportive of women's rowing back at that time. In fact, I don't know whether Janice remembers it or not, but those oars that we took to Vichy were borrowed from Penn AC. They were oars that they used in their junior program, and they were lovely Pocock hollow shanked oars that they agreed to let us take to Vichy to row with. And of course, we had these oars. Janice remembers them. And we had to get the oars off the plane and get them on a train to go down to Vichy. And when we went to check the oars in, the conductor, because Janice was with the other end of carrying these oars with me, the conductor said, oh no, mademoiselle, you cannot do that. You're on a first-class train, and we do not permit oars to go on a first-class train because it's bagage. And we said, well, we have to have our oars with us. And they said, absolutely no. And we said, well, is there anyone we can talk to? And this is all in my high school French, by the way. And he directs us to the other side of Orly Station to talk to a higher ranked person. We carry the oars all the way across Orly Station. This is also around 4 a.m. in the morning. And we get to this new office. And he said, no, mademoiselle, stay on first class train. This is bagage. And he sends us to someone else's office on the other side of Orly Station. And we traipse through carrying these 8-foot oars in this carrier. We get there, he sends us to another office. And all this is in French. They're refusing to put refusing to allow the oars on the train. So finally I said, okay, fine. We would like to cash in our first class tickets for second class tickets so we can have the oars on the train. Well, suddenly, miraculously, as the sun started to come up in Paris, all these gentlemen who spoke nothing but French started to speak English, And they put a baggage car on the first class train so our oars could go to Vichy. But that was PennAC loaning them to us. It was lovely.
So that's another example of never taking no for an answer. So, good work.
Can I get in here?
Absolutely, Gardner.
Am I on?
You are on.
You're on, Gardner.
Oh, yes. Back to Vichy, please. Now, we stayed in a wonderful little place. Very nice little restaurant. White tablecloth, nice napkins. One of those French waiters who could stack the plates all the way up his arm like this and put everything in and not drop anything. And we had 5-course meals. And the first meal started with a big plate and this tiny little thing in the middle with this delicious sauce. And we scooped it up and it was gone. And then another one came out, another plate, another tiny little piece of fish, beautiful sauce on top of it, scarfed it up, disappeared immediately. Another plate, another tiny little thing, maybe a little bit of salad, maybe something else. And then after 5 courses, we said, well, where's dinner? You know, we were rowers, we were big Americans. Remember that, Jim? We had to eat. And this was our routine in our nice little place. It was so elegant and delightful. So somebody said, well, the Australians know where to find food. So we left our little place and went to find the Australians. And I don't know where they did it, but they had steaks, they had big things, they had food to eat. So we would always have our dinner at the nice little hotel with the waiter who stacked everything up like this and the 5 plates and everything, eat all that, and then we'd go find the Australians. And that was our training in Vichy. It was great fun.
And Gardner, you have the Vichy poster behind you? Is that
Oh, yes. Yes, can you see that?
great?
Yes, I've had it rolled up. I've had it rolled up for a long time. Brought it out. I think there's another one on this show too.
Very nice.
Anyway, that's my Vichy story. Thank you.
Thank you, Gardner.
We solved the food problem. The hotel we stayed at was not first class or 2nd star or 3rd star hotel. It was a 4-star hotel that we could handle, and they adored us there. They treated us marvelously. The first night we were there, they arranged to have bottled water in the rooms for us to brush our teeth with. And I can remember, I think everybody brushed their teeth at the same time. And they discovered that, remember, we're in Vichy, and Vichy is famous for its spas and its fountains. They had given us mineral water as the bottled water in the room. Have you ever tried mineral water with toothpaste? There's pounding at my door. It's Nancy Farrell. Bear, you're trying to poison us. What have you given us for water? This is horrible. So I had to explain to them we needed plain water. I couldn't insult their Vichy water. And the hotel person said, but we wanted to give you Vichy water to make you strong so you win. This was their attitude. They would do anything to help us. Then they no longer served food at the hotel, but they opened up the kitchen, and our mothers, Margie's mother, my mother, who wasn't a very good cook, Kathy Sater,
Yes.
did the cooking and actually did breakfast for us. And some of the men referees found out about it and they crashed it because they found that we were having good breakfasts with eggs and bacon and not just croissants. And it was marvelous. And then we had arranged to have dinner at the same restaurant every night. And of course, what was key was making sure that everybody got bottled water and even had the ice made from bottled water. And the one mistake that I made in planning for the trip was I forgot to take a French dictionary with me. So we found what was a reasonable restaurant where they agreed to serve us every night for our 18 people. They agreed to serve the same thing. And I arranged for what I remembered from my vocabulary, which was steak, potatoes, peas. So the first night, I remember Janice actually turned to me and said, Ernie, this is fantastic. This is so good. And I said, yeah, get ready for it because you're going to have it for 5 nights because I don't know any other words. By the time they got to the 3rd night, they had it with the steak. But that was how we survived until after that race with the food.
These are great stories. Anybody else have anything they want to share? I know we're running out of time, but
Yes, if I could just steal a little airtime.
Please.
I don't have a keyboard in front of me, so I can't write a chat note. But I want to say hello to Ernie. I mean Tina. Haven't spoken in a long time, which is my fault. But anyway, here I am. Hello.
Hi, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Anybody else have anything to share? All right.
Thank you for doing this.
We've touched on so many different themes tonight. I think friendship is the overriding one. You know, I think about the access to our sport, and what Jim and John touched on, and even the story that Jinx told about how Janice came about to rowing. And I often wonder that, you know, how people actually get to the spot. I mean, I remember just riding by Boathouse Row from '76 my whole life and wondering what the other side of the river and inside those houses look like. I think that, you know, the common theme here is that we all feel so lucky that we want to give it and share it with as many people as we possibly can. And I think that needs to, you know, that message needs to resonate. We had an event, Women of the Row, and it was, you know, 60 or 70 women, you know, in a room, and there were a few college age women, and they came up to me at the end of the night and they said, I had no idea all these women rowed. I had no idea that this many people were rowing. So the access is one thing, and then getting people to stay engaged in our sport is another thing. And I think that, you know, letting people know that you're out there and that they have this huge network to rely upon is really important to grow our sport. So thank you all for being here tonight. It's wonderful to see so many faces, and I know that that we're very thankful for the Vichy Eight for sharing the stories with us. And I hope that each one of them, each one of you, know how appreciative we are for, as Carol said, putting the boat in the water, because I think that was, you know, the perfect analogy. All right, so we will, I will be posting, I will send you guys a follow-up link with this recording, and it'll also be on our YouTube page, but I'll send it to you directly in the next day or two. You could feel free to share it. We'd love to, you know, get more college and high school women to view this and know the faces of those that came before them. And we hope you'll join us for our next story hour.
I just want to say one thing. Sophie, I'm sorry that I haven't seen you for my daily kiss. Sophie always gives me a kiss when she sees me getting out of the boat.
Here's one for you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, guys. Have a good
you.
night. Good night. Good night.
Night.